So recently we talked about the new updates coming to Blender 4.0, and we mentioned that 4.0, the alpha, has a brand new repeat zone node, and this node will simply allow you to repeat the same action over and over instead of creating multiple nodes. We mentioned how you can get it, as if you go over to the geometry node and you hit Shift and A, if you go down to utilities, you're going to find this right here. Now you guys had questions, a lot of you guys spotted that this was just for each node coming from Houdini, which is technically true, because if we come in and go over to Houdini and we load in a simple geometry, if we bring in a box, we can also call up that for each node. So this does exactly what the new repeat node does, or should I say the repeat node does, similar to what you can get with the for each node. So we're going to launch in a for each primitive node, and we can connect this right there and come right over here and throw in a simple null. Now between this and this other part, you can throw a transform, which is technically what we showed off in that video. So we can throw in that transform. So with that there, if we go right to the very first for each, this is a little bit more interesting compared to what we currently have in Blender. Because at this point, if we come in here and we choose to say we like the method to fetch the feedback, we can set that in, then go over to this other one where we can change this to be by count. So once we do that, we can now start getting some interesting stuff. So we'd like to preview what the final result will look like, and you can see that. So at this point, we can set our iteration from 1 or from 0 all the way to 10. Now, if you did see the initial video where we talked about the 4.0 new update, we said you can actually get this to translate from one point to another. And if you change the merge each iteration to feedback each iteration, you're getting the same result. So you can set that this way and you can set it this way. And yes, you guys were right by saying that the repeat zone from 4.0, the alpha, which is a brand new node in Blender, is more like what you can get with the for each node that is currently available in Houdini. Moving forward, you guys did ask a question if you can use the simulation node alongside the repeat zone node. And yes, this is very possible, although there's a couple of things to keep in mind, and this includes how much data you get to generate. Back here in Blender, we have a simple setup that deals with the repeat input and the transform. Now with this, you can transform stuff up and down, you can just simply have fun doing that. But once you throw in a join node, this is where data multiplication actually starts. Because at this point, once you connect the repeat node to the join node and the transform node to the join node, the more the iteration, you now start noticing that we're making multiple copies. At this point, we have our face set to 6. If we increase that, you see we now have a lot of faces. So this is what we're dealing with at this point. This is transforming what we're having, and this is creating more stuff. So if we bring this down and we throw in a simple transform, add that transform. If we move that, I want you guys to see that we'll have way more stuff going in. So this is a lot of things generated at once. It's just going to merge the transforms, and you don't see these ones that are hidden underneath. You can play with the direction of these things and get the results that you want. So let's talk about the simulation node and how this actually ties together. So for the simulation node, we're simply going to go over to the simulation zone, bring out the simulation zone, connect the group output and the group input together, throw in a simple transform. And the beautiful thing with the simulation node is once you transform to a certain axis, if you press the playback button, it just transforms based off the value of that axis. So if you choose to do a simple join node like we did with the repeat zone, what would happen is if we press the playback button, you would notice that we have something quite similar. This is also creating multiple meshes. For you to see this, you need to throw in another transform just like we did with the repeat mesh, and if you change the values, you can start seeing these things as they travel through. So to put things quite simply, the simulation zone works with the playback and the repeat zone works with iteration. But can you work with them together? Yes, you can. So to work with them, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get a brand new scene and reconnect all of these like we did before. Get the simulation zone and the repeat zone. Connect the group input to simulation input, connect the simulation input to the repeat input, and connect the repeat output to the simulation output and the simulation output to the group output. So you guys saw what we did earlier, which has to do with the transform. We're doing the same thing. So we're getting the transform geometry and we're connecting that transform geometry here. If we move this to a point, what happens is if we press the playback button, the same thing happens, okay? With the repeat, what happens is the iteration becomes the value that times the value you have with your transform. If you choose to do a simple connection like this, so if I set this to 2, for example, and we press the playback button, that is the speed. Actually, let's set this to 1. All right, so this is the speed that this will travel. So per frame, this is moving 1 meter per frame. If we stop that and set this all the way back, and if we increase this by 2, is going to be like 2 times 1, which is going to be 2. So it will be moving 2 meters per frame. If we set this to 6, that is going to be interesting, and press the playback, you now see the speed. So the iteration in this case is actually doing all of that. So how you get to work with this is simple. Set this to 1. I'm going to set this back to 1, and we're going to bring in that join node. So we'll throw in the join node here, and I'm going to connect this join node right over to this point. Now with this join node connected, we would like to also throw in another transform node. So if we throw in that transform node and we connect this transform right here, if we now set this to a value and send this all the way back, press the playback button, I want you guys to see that we have some movement going on there. This is not void of the fact that it is creating multiple meshes. So to each playback, there is multiple meshes, and you would only see them when you start fiddling with the rotation and the scale. Transforms will probably not cut it out like you guys saw, and you can see how much things that this is creating for us. Let's increase the rotations of what we have there, and we can also increase the rotations of something that we have right here. So this is really good, but one thing you might want to also keep in mind is the chances that this will crash your Blender is extremely high. So I'm just going to move this all the way back. If we press the playback button now, you can now start seeing how crazy this is. So these can create multiple meshes for you, and the speed at which the both tools, which is the simulation zone and the repeat zone, the speed at which they create stuff when they are meshed together is just crazy. So I would simply suggest that if you're thinking about using the simulation zone alongside the repeat zone, that you should pretty much use it very briskly. Say maybe use it from 0 to 10 frames, and this is just because you want to automatically create stuff. 10 frames should be good enough. Pushing this all the way to about 20, depending on what the parameters that you put in there are, this might potentially crash Blender, as this simply generates tons of data easily. So to put this to rest, you can use the simulation zone alongside the repeat zone, but I wouldn't suggest that you do that. You can use this if you're thinking about, creating something that you probably want to export. Maybe you want to create some sort of VDBs and you just want to experiment with this, something that just runs with a simulation, then this is definitely a good pick. And if you're thinking about doing some motion graphics, I think you should just simply stick with the repeat zone, or maybe just simply stick with the simulation zone. Using the both of them together just for the sole purpose of motion graphics may not necessarily be the best thing I would suggest that you do, at least not yet. So this is it. For those who are thinking about taking a look at this, or probably want to try it out, then links to the alpha build of Blender 4.0 is going to be in the description, so do well to check it out. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. Until I see you guys in the next one, peace.